Hello and welcome to the Global Innovators in Business series. In this series, we interview leaders and innovators from different fields to share their experiences and advice with undergraduate students to provide inspiration and motivation. Our guest today is Basil, the general partner at Nclude, a venture capitalist fund and fintech innovation engine with a core focus on the Middle East and North Africa. The Nclude fund focuses on driving financial inclusion through strategic investments. Basil is an experienced company builder working closely with founders to create disruptive enterprises with strong emphasis on enterprise technology in the Middle East and North Africa. He also helped very early stages of the Reuters venture capital group, where he made investments in global tech giants such as Netscape, Yahoo, and WebEx. As an influential force in the venture capital space, Basil is at the forefront of fintech revolution in Egypt, a country experiencing a quantum leap forward in its fintech ecosystem. Today, he joins us to share his insights on raising capital, discussing the role of fintech in shaping Egypt's 2030 vision, and shed light on advice for students seeking career. Hello and welcome to this episode of the Global Innovators in Business series. In this series, we bring leaders and innovators from different fields to share their advice and experiences with undergraduate students to provide inspiration and motivation. Our guest today is Basil, the general partner at Nclude, a venture capitalist fund and fintech innovation engine with a core focus on the Middle East and North Africa. The Nclude fund focuses on driving financial inclusion through strategic investments. Basil is an experienced company builder working closely with founders to create disruptive enterprises with strong emphasis on enterprise technology in the Middle East and North Africa. He also helped very early stages of the Reuters venture capital group, where he made investments in global tech giants such as Netscape, Yahoo, and WebEx. As an influential force in the venture capital space, Basil is at the forefront of fintech revolution in Egypt, a country experiencing a quantum leap forward in its fintech ecosystem. Today, he joins us to share his insights on raising capital, discussing the role of fintech in shaping Egypt's 2030 vision, and shed light on advice for students seeking careers that lead to impact in developing worlds. Thank you, Basil, for joining us.
Thanks, Chris. It's great to be here with you.
Thank you. So the first question I had was, first of all, could you share a small background on what's led you here and what's brought you to this role that you currently have?
Sure. It's a little bit of serendipity and a little bit of knowing what you want to do in life. It never is a perfectly straight line. And I feel very fortunate and lucky to be doing what I'm doing. But it all started that when I graduated from the American University in Cairo in mechanical engineering, I knew two things. I didn't want to be an engineer. Having studied it and done an internship, that's not what I was going to do. And two, I was looking to go international pretty fast. And I got fortunate enough to leave university and join Reuters, which is a news agency to most people, but it's also a business of information and technology. And they had set up a venture capital arm out of London called the Greenhouse Fund. Now, if I could tell you I really knew what I was joining, I'd be kidding, right? I didn't know. Back in 1997, 98, venture capital was not as common a word as it is today, and definitely was a very unique place to end up. But I did end up in the VC arm of Reuters. It was called the Greenhouse Fund. It was run by a gentleman named John Taysom, Norman Fiore, and a few other people. And I ended up working on deals that were really fantastic. We ended up working on Netscape, WebEx, VeriSign. What else? There's so many, advertising.com, which became AOL later on or got bought by AOL. And as a young analyst, I would tell you my job was to read these business plans, look at them, assess whether they're worthy of investment, whether they fit into our mantra of how we were thinking about investments at the time, and then write memos and send them to the investment committee and things like that. It opened my eyes to a whole new world, right? So here I am, this engineer from Egypt, now working in London and eventually in San Francisco with the Greenhouse Fund on these transactions and these names that now looking back, they're obviously big names, but at the time they were very small companies that we were looking. And so I knew after that I needed to get some more skills. So I did my MBA. I went to HBS for a couple of years, graduated at 2004, and I returned to Reuters, but in an operating role. So I ran businesses across Europe, the Middle East and Africa, emerging markets. And eventually I was running a business out of Washington, DC called Intellectual Property and Science. I'll spare you the details. I'm sure people can read about it online. But the bottom line, getting operating experience became foundational to my return to VC. So in 2016, I came back to the Middle East, just had exited, or Thomson Reuters, I should say, had exited the IP and science business that I was running. And then I didn't know what to do next. And I decided to come back to VC. And the combination of having done VC early in my career as an analyst, as well as my operating experience, set me up very well to what I was about to do next, which is figure out the best investments to make in the Middle East. I did that for a couple of years with Global Ventures and then now with Nclude, and really start to support the tech ecosystem here as it develops and grows. Now, it's become more than just a job. Now it's like a way of living. Being a venture capitalist is day and night jobs. Founders call you at all sorts of times. I get messages and sometimes late at night. Hey, can I speak to you? I don't know what to do about this employee who's about to quit and I want to keep him and or her. And how do I retain them? Do I give them shares? Do I pay them more? It's a lifestyle, right? You become part of founders' journeys. I'll never, ever take the credit that founders should get for the hard work it takes to build a business. It really is a tough job, but I get the privilege of supporting them with capital and being alongside them in that journey.
That's such an interesting journey and experience. So many questions there. One is coming from a company that is very global in its footprint, very global in nature, and you were in somewhat the representative or the leading face for Middle East and North Africa and this region for a good part of running the companies and part of the region. How did the global company see this developing market? How did they value it? How did they bring that into the ecosystem? And if you're in their position, you're managing this type of company, how would you be able to more or so leverage or better utilize or better build upon the expertise and location of this specific particular geographic region in the global portfolio?
Emerging markets in general are very interesting, right? They're interesting for a number of reasons. They generally, all of them characterized by a relatively young population that's digitally native. That means they're born after the time when the internet was born. Most of them are born with literally a mobile phone in their hands. And if you have ever been to China, India, Middle East, Latin America, or Eastern Europe and Russia, you'll see people are on their phones quite a bit. I know that's a global phenomenon, but it's also an extreme because of the age groups that you see in emerging markets. And being able to tap into that young population through digital means is one of the biggest opportunities global companies see. A company like Reuters or Thomson Reuters, after it was acquired by the Thomson family, are really companies trying to reach younger and younger audiences through their content, through their media, through their software, and so on. And being able to make that happen is not easy for a big company. So many times it ends up being through either partnerships or acquisitions of younger, smaller companies. And so I got the privilege when I was running Middle East and Africa for Thomson Reuters to do the acquisition of Zawiya. Zawiya is a small, I don't think they would think they were small, but relatively smaller company in the Middle East that was producing content and data and information about financial markets here in the region, private and public markets. And great founder, built a great business. But as they were scaling, they needed more and more capital, which wasn't available in the VC community here. Because at the time, 2011, 2012, the VC community here was still very small. So the partnership with Reuters is the one that made the most sense. And eventually we acquired them. So I worked on that acquisition and took them onto our Reuters platform and then grew them across the region even further. So Zawiya today is quite a large name here in the Middle East because it was acquired by Reuters. I also tell this story because it's one of the main reasons that led me to get into venture. Because when we acquired Zawiya, I knew that one of the reasons that acquisition was possible was because of the lack of venture. And so by getting into venture capital and raising money from private entities and investing in startups, you're actually strengthening the local technology companies as well. So I did the acquisition, but I also learned a big lesson, which is small companies in emerging markets require more and more capital to grow.
So, yeah. What type of how was the capital used? What was the necessary things that were lacking without the
Yeah. So capital is a means to an end. A lot of times startups and in headlines, a lot of times there's this publicizing, oh, company X raised X something million, whatever, 10 million, 20 million, 100 million, whatever the numbers the headlines capture, and in dollars. And people celebrate that as though it's an event. In the VC world, I think many of us know that's not, it's a milestone for the company, sure, but it's a means to an end. What are you going to do with that money? And how are you going to use the money is way more important than just simply raising the money, right? Not to belittle fundraising. It's a very tough job for founders to raise capital, but what you're going to do and how you're going to spend it. In the early days, companies are looking for product market fit. They're trying to figure out how to invest money to build a product which customers want to buy. Or put it differently, are they solving a real problem, a real issue, right? Real issues could be, and examples in emerging markets are as basic as supply chains for food, pharmaceutical. You can also find issues in education and access to education or affordability of education, issues in financial, which is one of the areas I focus on, financial inclusion, banking. Lots of people don't have bank accounts, don't have credit cards. It's not like the US and Europe where you have access to this. Emerging markets, populations have very little access to banks, for example. And are you solving a real problem? And the money that you raise at that point is usually for that. Now, later stage companies usually have found something and they need to expand. So once you find the problem to solve, you raise capital to expand into other countries or to provide more products and services to your existing customers. It depends on the business, of course.
I see. So in developing markets, once you come in, for example, in like when you're in Reuters, when you're like acquiring different companies and when giving them funding, you are also leveraging your larger platform as well to build some capabilities. I think in developing worlds, the mindset that I always see is there's so much population and so many people that can benefit and access. And I think that access piece is very difficult, not only just accessing a greater market within Egypt or within the Middle East, but also accessing other countries outside of the region because it's so difficult to go from one country to the other and breaking those barriers. So have you seen that more funding is going into this like expansion, greater markets, scaling portion of funding, or has it still been more focused on technology building and research?
It's a great question, and I don't have the data to answer that question, Chris, in a specific way. My guess is that it goes through different waves. So as new technologies come out like AI or virtual reality, you'll see a rush to building new solutions. So first products and new ideas. What can this technology really do? Blockchain being a great example of people using it to do all sorts of things. Yes, crypto, but other things as well, creating all sorts of types of blockchains for contracts, for tokenization of real world assets, all sorts of things like that. But then once you get through that hype cycle, we call it, you go through a little bit of the valley of death. And the valley of death is where the bad ideas go to die and the good ideas have to find a way to get through that valley by really continuing to improve on their product and capturing more and more of the customers. And then you go through a growth phase, and the growth phase being the part where growth capital, which is scaling, expansion into new markets and so on. Now, I mentioned this because that cycle is pretty well known to most people who build businesses, and everybody experiences it to some degree or another. But it does differ a lot between US and European markets versus emerging markets. Okay. And the reason being is that in emerging markets, some of the problems people are solving are quite fundamental, like access to healthcare. There's so many people who do not have access to healthcare or do not have access to banking, as I mentioned before. And so the product market fit is really about how do you get a simple, easy to use, understood product into the hands of the masses. That's a very difficult problem. Sounds easier than it's said. It's easier said than done. Let's put it that way. And once you do, then the scaling comes relatively quickly. In the US and in Europe, it's much more competitive. There's so many products and technologies out there that being able to stand out and capturing customers is a very expensive affair. And so in the first part, product market fit doesn't only mean finding a good product, but being able to find the right users who will use your.
Good. So why are you focused on includes in financial inclusion and financial technology? What inspired you or what pushed you to work on this part of the ecosystem?
After having done a couple of years of general VC and I invested across many different sectors, I decided that really financial inclusion is one of the more fundamental, profound problems of our age, of our time, especially here in the Middle East and Africa. If you think about the region, there's over 1 billion people living here, and I think it's less than 10% of them have access to banking. Okay. So that means there's, nearly 900 million or whatever exact number it might be of people who do not have the fundamental things that you and I enjoy, like transferring money to friends and family, being able to take credit in order to, or borrowing money in order to be able to buy basic goods. None of us can afford all the things in our lives. Sometimes you have to take credit in order to pay for those goods, right? If you're buying a house, for example, or if you're buying a car. But that doesn't just apply to individuals, it also applies to small businesses. So even small businesses have no bank accounts, have no ability to get banked and so on. It's such a big problem that in some ways, the future of these countries relies on bringing them into the banking system. So if you think about how these economies will develop, if they're going to bootstrap themselves out of poverty, if people are going to be able to bootstrap themselves out of the challenges of day-to-day life that many of these countries face, bringing people and giving them access to banking services, allowing them to save money, multiply their money, giving them credit and giving them access to that becomes a life and death story, right? And therefore, it's a worthy cause and a big enough of a problem to go after. Now, it's tough. There are regulations. There are lots of pitfalls to worry about. Many of them don't have credit scores, don't have any data. KYCing them and finding out who they are is the challenge. So this is not a simple problem to solve. But I don't think opening more bank branches is going to solve it either. It's really going to come down to your phone and the technology in your hand to making that happen.
So interesting. I think as you look at the different markets, like when we look at China, there's a very standard WeChat Pay, Alipay. Even if we look at Kenya, I think there's M-Pesa, there's like a more standardized across the entire country, a very standard form of like digital payment. I think one of the biggest challenges for developing markets has been there's like interest in building like individual technologies, but sometimes there's maybe too many like small online payments that are trying to compete against each other, or it's very difficult to tap into the entire market. So what is the dream situation of Egypt in fintech?
Yeah, so it's a great question. And the story of WePay in China is a great story about how many more people got into the financial system by just being able to use a simple technology on their phone, and M-Pesa in Kenya, you refer to. Now, I'll start off by saying, yes, China, big country, and Kenya also a relatively large country, but across Middle East and Africa, there are still many more people that don't even have those tools. So getting them access to it is the number one goal. But a little bit like Maslow's hierarchy of needs, which you were talking about prior to starting this interview, fintech is also a stack that's made up of multiple levels, right? Identifying the person and knowing who they are and bringing them onto a platform where they can have an account, a wallet, sometimes it's referred to, is the first step. Then being able to provide products for them to save money, to invest money, to borrow money is the next, right? And then from there, things get even more complex where you can provide them algorithmic trading and you can provide them more sophisticated solutions and so on. So there is a stack that needs to be built over time. Usually the problem, and M-Pesa is a good example, it's a great story, but ultimately it's a wallet that's predominantly used for small payments and small transfers, right? And the sophistication we need to get into is how to apply that also to businesses and small businesses as well, how to apply this in a credit format and provide lending and borrowing for people using data that they're producing by using these platforms. So there's still multiple let's call it levels to this story yet to go. Now, payments, I love payments. I think it's an interesting industry as a subsegment of fintech, but it's definitely gotten a little bit overcrowded. I expect to see some consolidation to happen. Companies across borders acquiring each other to build regional champions and maybe even some global champions coming out of emerging markets. But the interest right now is a lot more around the credit layer, if you like, small borrowing and small lending to both individuals and to businesses is really challenging, especially that interest rates are rising now. So that's even creating more problems because the cost of borrowing is getting more expensive.
We had the opportunity to interview Nclude, which is kind of doing a product-based version of buy now, pay later with like one product. And I think like the access and the small micropayments that it has every day, like 3 million micropayments and transactions, is so unique and so interesting to the entire landscape. And like having that same ability in Egypt, and I'm sure the same need like is very, very dire. So I think that's the key trigger that's built that, and yeah, the key trigger that was like inherent in the foundation was like a very good mobile payment system. So I think a mobile payment system is really like a kind of like a brings everything together into like a more easy and digestible, deliverable way. But one question that's really, really helps me, and I was thinking about was in this process, I know governments have a very strong influence and push and what a government has in their regulations. I know the 2030 vision for Egypt has this financial inclusion a part of its goals. And I know China had a similar document that kind of leads businesses in a frenzy about what is the government like looking for, like how do we like make sure our business fits those needs and those goals. How have you seen in developing markets that relationship between government and the private sector, and like how has it influenced your role?
I think it's important for governments to lay out a framework for which the private sector and startups can work against, because there is definitely anything that touches money is immediately subject to a whole bunch of regulations to protect consumers against fraud, also to make sure money laundering and terrorism financing and all of these things are handled properly. You don't want these platforms to become avenues for illegal money to transfer through it. That's the role of government, is to put the regulations, to set the rules and set the boundaries. And in most countries, those are relatively clear and are available, and they're usually quite restrictive. So it makes small businesses really struggle because they require a certain amount of paid in capital. They require a certain amount of compliance to happen from the beginning, which is not usually very good or conducive to innovation. Now, Egypt, Nigeria, Saudi Arabia, UAE, and many countries in the region have also published regulations to allow fintechs to flourish in this environment. And the way they did it is by creating sandboxes. These are environments in which you get to test out your product without having to worry about every little regulation around you. It allows you to have ongoing conversation with the regulator about how your business would work in this regulated environment, what laws or rules might need to be changed, and vice versa. What can the government do to support your business's growing? So they've created safe spaces for a lot of fintechs to develop. And it seems to have been very successful. So open banking in Saudi and UAE is coming online very quickly. In Egypt, we've seen over, 150, 160 fintechs develop just in one country over the last few years because of this sandbox and because of this regulation. So it's good to have a dialogue, right? And it's good to have it. Now, like every story, there's two sides to it. You talk to the entrepreneurs, they'll tell you the regulator isn't doing enough and they're not moving fast enough. You talk to the regulator, they're like, the startups are pushing us too hard, too quickly. They need to be more conscientious of the change and making sure that change happens at a pace that the consumers would be able to understand, right? And that consumers would be able to adapt to. So both sides will tell you different versions. As an investor, I would say Egypt and other large countries in Africa have started to give a lot of confidence to us to be able to invest in companies, even pre-regulation changes, because of these environments that they've created. It's a positive momentum. You talked about Encopa a little while ago. There's Flutterwave and OPay and PayMob and Money Fellows. And there's so many different companies that have become large, sizable fintech players across the region. And I think you'll see many more over the next few years developing. So as an investor, that's exciting for us, right? Because we want to invest behind the things that are growing quickly, that are getting the recognition for having changed the way consumers and small businesses operate. There's no perfect story here, is what I would say to you. There's no perfect version of this. Every country is a little bit different, but I'm excited about what's happening in emerging markets and in Egypt as well.
Yeah. I think there's almost been a strategic advantage in developing markets to working with the governments, because this is something that's very, very difficult to do in developed markets, like work that closely with the government regulation. But different people we've interviewed, such as like Zipline, like leverage like the aviation kind of like technology and work with the governments in Rwanda to say, oh, like we can test our drone delivery service in your region. And they gave them the flexibility to do that inside a small town, like that sandbox environment. Or even in Singapore, where there's like much more of a support for like cell-based meat, they like open that up, they support more regulations so that individual companies are able to like work on more like cell-based meat products and launch that, because the government was like more emphasizing a necessity of a sustainable source of food within the country. So like some parts of working in different countries is very helpful to understand the government and like understand where are the places that you can like work with the regulators to make your own kind of like strategic advantage inside the company. And it's really interesting that you mentioned also like individual countries in the Middle East and North Africa have their own individual sandboxes that they can like support each other. In UAE, they have an individual sandbox that can be replicated other places around the Middle East and North Africa. The question that comes from that is, this region is very diverse and with very different types of countries, different types of players. Have you seen companies that have been able to expand across this region? Or how do you see scaling from the westernmost to the easternmost to the Middle East? How do you see this as a region, or do you see this as individual countries?
It's a great question, and you're spot on, Chris, to bring that up. So on the one side, I'm painting the positive side of this, which is that regulators here have been forthcoming and have foresight and working towards that. But to your point, it is multiple countries. There's over 50 plus countries in Africa, over 22 countries in the Middle East. And so the bottom line is, for startups to scale, it's actually a bit, these borders and these regulations create barriers for them, because every time they go to another country, they have to register again and start again with the regulator. And so it has been challenging. To answer your question, no, we have not yet seen a true example of a company being able to expand across multiple borders. But we are in the beginning phase of seeing a few companies starting to go to new countries. So lots of out of the UAE, a lot go to Saudi, and out of Saudi, a lot go to the UAE. There's a lot of similarity there. Egypt, you're seeing a lot from Egypt going into Saudi, UAE. Again, a lot of similarities. A lot of companies out of Nigeria are looking at Ghana and looking at neighboring countries, and obviously Kenya, neighboring countries, Eastern Africa, etc. But just recently, over the last couple of years, you've started to see a few companies, OPay is one of them, going from Nigeria to Egypt. And in the first few months, they struggled like there's no tomorrow, because it's like a whole new environment for them. But they seem to have found their footing and slowly navigating through it. I've seen companies out of Egypt going to Pakistan now on top of Saudi and UAE and expanding there. So it's becoming interesting. I guess I feel like we're in the third wave or phase of VC here in the region. The first was lots of local companies solving local problems. The second was people coming and learning how to scale those and getting them to a certain size where they actually are meaningful in their own countries. And now the third is moving not just in one country, but across multiple countries, right? Now, I guess the answer to your question is, no, it's challenging to move cross-border. If you're in content delivery or e-commerce, maybe it's a little bit easier. But if you're in fintech or healthcare where you're heavily regulated, it's definitely a lot more challenging.
Thank you for the answer. It's really helpful. And to understand like how the different perspectives in the different countries can lead to varying ways. I think it's also very difficult. I think one of the interviews we did. So recently I went to Kenya and I also went to Egypt for a trip. So that was actually this entire series is based off of like developing regions and like the different companies and different
Yeah.
opportunities there. But I think we also interviewed Sandy, which is trying to go into Egypt and different other companies that are seeking like this, like entering the Egypt market because it's like trying to build a Pan-Africa like base. But
Egypt, 100+ million people. It's a big opportunity. There's no doubt.
yes. But I guess what makes you wake up in the morning and be proud and be happy that you're doing this role?
Man, that's a tough question because there's so many things that make me proud, right? Listen, VC gets painted sometimes with a picture of a little bit of, what's the right word? That it's all rosy and we're raising money and these companies are growing. And yet in the background, what people don't see are the tough time that founders go through, the unsuccessful companies that fold and have to let go of people, and some of the challenges that happen in the back. And so before I answer your question, we have to give kudos and we have to give recognition to those entrepreneurs who've tried and did not succeed. Because what actually they're doing is paving the way for others to come after them and learn from that and avoid those mistakes and do better the next time and the second time. And so obviously I wake up in the morning wishing for success, very excited about the founders who are doing well and supporting them with their journey, whether it's introducing them to a regulator, introducing them to another investor. Those are the things that excite me, and being able to build friendships and relationships with these founders on a very human level. I would consider some of them close friends. It's not just a business relationship, because over time you go through so many challenges together, difficulties of fundraising, difficulties of employees, businesses that are on the brink of collapse. I think there's companies we've gotten down to 1 week of cash before we were able to raise more money for it, etc. You go through such difficult times that the human relationship becomes very profound. But I will say this, it is the journey that I enjoy the most about this. The ultimate success that you read about in a headline of a company being acquired or IPOing or a successful sale is a great moment. But I think the journey of spending every day solving real problems, watching users and customers enjoy the new products that they have, that their parents may have not even imagined they would have access to, is really profound. I've sat in on and watched client users using health tech platforms, telemedicine, and getting access to doctors in remote locations, in places where there are no doctors, and being able to see that happen and watch the impact it has on their lives, their children, and their overall being gives you a huge amount of satisfaction. As I say to people, if you want to be a venture capitalist, it's a lifestyle. It's not a job. There are good days in VC and there are lots of bad days in VC, and you have to enjoy the journey more than anything else. Yes, we all wish for success, but you have to be very respectful of those who came ahead of us and paved the way to that success.
It's the journey and the process of getting there and paving the way that makes every story. It's like the bulk of every story, and the ending is a very good cherry on top. But the real cake is the entire.
What happens in between? What happens every day?
Thank you so much, Basil. I'll open it up now to questions, and I have some questions already pre-written and pre-asked. But Diana, Chloe, Nikki, if you guys want to jump in too, feel free if you guys have a question. Okay. First, some of the questions that came from a pre-audience, a pre-interview questionnaire. So one question for you is, what is the most undervalued sector, or what is the most undervalued opportunity in the Egyptian economy?
Agriculture. 14% of the economy is based on agriculture, and it continues to be still the most challenging sector to bring technological innovation to. You have a combination of a very low educated or uneducated population of people, so their ability to even read and write is a challenge. So a mobile app doesn't really solve their problem if they can't read what's on it. And because of the history of Egypt, the farming sector has become very fragmented, is probably the right word. So yes, there are some large farms, but the predominance is small farmers with small acreage trying to eke out a living from that area. And yet at the same time, Egypt is one of the breadbaskets of Africa. You have the Nile, the Delta, and therefore a very big source and very important source of food and nutrition, both to Egypt and to the rest of the world. It produces quite a bit of agriculture. And so looking at how to solve the problem of agriculture with technology, or the challenges of agriculture technology, whether it's on the financial side. So we invested in a company called Mosera that does financial lending to farmers, but you also how to get access to the latest technologies and solutions is an important part of making sure that sector continues to be competitive on a global scale. So that's the one I would pick. I'm sure there's plenty others. There's lots of, this isn't the only one, but that's the one that's been on my mind a lot lately.
Yeah. I was studying in Oxford for economic development. They mentioned like one of the biggest hurdles to succeeding or developing economies, like getting to this exponential growth period, is exponential growth usually comes from factory or industrial growth. And until you get to enough of an agricultural productivity, it's very difficult to get the multiples in the industrial productivity. Getting to that baseline, getting to that 0 point is so important, and leveraging technologies in the outside world to build into Egypt is definitely so helpful. On the same note, another question here is, what is the bottleneck to further growth in the MENA region?
Yes. The global landscape right now is definitely a very daunting landscape. Rising interest rates and high inflation environment are not conducive to investment anywhere in the world, for that matter. And in emerging markets, and Egypt in particular, it's been hit pretty hard. The prices of assets have become very difficult to assess based on on higher interest rates and higher inflation. People's profound daily lives have been hugely impacted by the cost of goods and buying raw materials, or even just buying household goods that they need to live and survive. I mention this because it's not a bottleneck per se as a word, but it's definitely the biggest challenge that we face in startups today. It's not that you're not solving a good idea, is how do you make people spend money on these things when they're literally trying to figure out how to put food on the table for their families and making that happen. The other thing that we've been talking a lot in the Middle East and Africa region about as investors is access to working capital financing. It is very difficult to finance startups and early stage companies because of the lack of history. Usually they're unprofitable, which makes banks very weary of investing in them. So you really need private sectors or private investors to come in and provide credit in a relatively risky sort of environment, if that makes sense. Young companies, unproven business models, and here they are borrowing debt or taking on credit. So I guess the short answer is, I think the macroeconomics and the toughness of it will impact everybody, and it will impact emerging markets quite a bit. I think for emerging markets in particular, and startups to be specific, accessing credit is probably one of the bigger short-term problems that they will all face.
One question that just came in is, in your experience helping to build companies, what was one of the most interesting and one of the most fascinating experiences? And what was the problem you're trying to solve, and how did you solve it?
Yeah. There's so many stories. Where do I start? I like to tell this story because it's very different to where I'm focused today. So as I said, I talk a lot about fintech, financial inclusion. I talk a little bit about agriculture and health tech. But there was a founder that I had, a call was set up for me to meet this founder. And I had read about his business before the call. And even before the call started, I had already made up my mind I was going to turn down this business. It's a company called Mini. And Shineli, who's the founder of this business, I had never met, had built a business around shout outs. So these are platforms where you can buy shout outs for your friends from celebrities. Okay. I'm thinking, who needs this? This can't be a problem that you need to solve, right? It's a fad. It will last a little bit. And then the bottom line is it doesn't really solve a problem of any value or magnitude that I would be interested in. Leave it for another investor. We had a 30-minute call. And I think within 15 minutes, 20 minutes, I had made up my mind that I would invest in this company and I would back it. And I say that because he's a fantastic entrepreneur who opened my eyes to the world of entertainment and not something I had really thought about. Now, how many of us can afford a Swift concert ticket? Not many. It's a pretty expensive ticket to buy. And in emerging markets, it's even a luxury to be able to go and attend a concert or an event by a celebrity singer or whatever it might be. And I hadn't understood that actually there is, one of the prohibitive costs for the larger masses to be able to be part of these events is cost. And one of the prohibitive elements for musicians to be able to provide low cost entertainment is the fact that it's very expensive to put on a concert and an event. And yet technology solves both. An example used was K-pop in South Korea did an online event during COVID in which they sold, I think it was like $10 tickets or something like that. And literally millions of people attended this concert around the world. And all of a sudden, they're a popular group, of course, but all of a sudden they had opened a brand new revenue stream for themselves and so on. And what he was looking to solve with Mini wasn't to do shout outs, was to how to bring entertainment to the masses and making it low cost and effective and accessible so that people could buy literally $1 ticket or $2 ticket and join these events from their mobile phones and again, be able to access entertainment. So does it solve a real problem? I probably argue it still doesn't, but is it a clever way to solve a fundamentally important issue in society, which is everybody should be able to have fun, enjoy themselves, and be able to access their most loved performers? It definitely does. And he's built a great business and it's growing and he's doing very well. I really love this entrepreneur.
That's so interesting. I think, I was very shocked. These shouts out to small short video businesses have been doing so well. But if I scroll through TikTok, I think some of the most popular ads are, I think, from these guys from Zimbabwe where I don't know, saying happy birthday with a message.
Yes, that's a new thing now that's going on.
Wow, this is a very new revenue stream. I've never thought
We're trying Zimbabwe to make money, right? Yes.
Yeah.
I think what we have to understand is everybody has the right to live life and pursue happiness, as they say. And everyone should be able to access entertainment at a relatively inexpensive price, right? Whether it's YouTube and advertising based, or whether it's artists charging low cost ticket, but everybody should be able to do that. And I think I see it as a right of life, frankly, to everybody.
Entertainment will be more and more important as we go into sure. I'm sure.
As we inch our way to a virtual world.
Yes. As AI starts taking over the work that we're doing.
That when it becomes unreal, celebrities as well. So
okay. Chloe had a question. What are you doing to help increase diversity across your portfolio, particularly with female-led companies?
It's a super big challenge. I'm always happy to say, we have, 12% of our founders are female. The answer is that's bullshit. It's too low. And it by no means represents society. There are many biases in the system, whether it's founders who take risks and the number of female founders versus the number of male founders that you can find, but also in terms of investors like myself and others, and the lenses and all the unfortunate blinders that we are nurtured in our lives in seeing where to invest and so on. So much has been written about it and so much has been studied about it that the short answer is we're far from achieving any goal or any sort of equality on that perspective. Now, I'm very fortunate to have a team that's exactly 50-50 male and female. So My key principal is Rana. She runs the fund on a day-to-day basis. She operates all the deals, etc. One of our key associates, Selma, she's also a female. And besides Abdul and Omar in the team, it's nice that we have that diversity amongst ourselves. And I think that's helped us to see and think more with a little bit more open perspective. But I'm nowhere near achieving what I think is an equitable distribution of capital. I think the whole industry still struggles with it. There are outreaches for sure that we do to specific founders that we've met along the way. And we try to nurture a more open relationship so that they do come to us when they're ready and they feel ready to do. But I would tell you, it's been a very profound challenge trying to find and invest in enough female founders to have an equitable society.
Yeah, that's across the board around the world. I think it's always a big challenge.
And anybody who gets, I think what I'll say is I always listen very carefully to how people answer this question. My colleagues and peers in the industry, anybody who says that becomes defensive in this question is still, you have to understand, is still struggling with it internally. You know what I mean? Is still struggling with it internally. It is shameful that we are where we are. And it is years multiplied together of challenges that have gotten us to where we are. But by no means should we be defensive, and going on the proactive side is incredibly important to do. But it will take another generation to break this loose. And I'm very supportive of everybody, the programs, the capital, and the individuals who put time and effort to try to change that. But it will take some time. And these changes, you can't change biases that quickly. They take their time over to work through a society and through a system.
Thank you for that answer. Thank you, Chloe, for the question. It's definitely a really good point to frame it. I guess the final question we have is if there's any advice you have for younger students seeking to grow their impact in their career, what would it be?
Yeah, I have a 21-year-old daughter who's also looking at the beginning of her career and thinking about what she wants to do. And I'm always lost for words to be on terms of giving her advice, because I think she has so many opportunities and options in front of her, which is great. But the reality is the virtual world that we've been living in has also made me realize that there's this new generation that hasn't touched reality as much as it should. Playing outside and interacting with others rather than through a phone, but through means of face-to-face has really declined over this last generation in a way that I don't personally think is healthy. And I know this makes me sound old and dusty as a human being, but the first piece of advice I would say is get into the real world and get on the ground in the way that you feel your life may be. It doesn't matter what you do. So if you want to be an impact investor, let's say, travel to the country or countries that you want to make an impact in, or the neighborhoods and societies that you think you can play a role in, and become part of it and understand the challenges people face before you think that by doing a little bit of ChatGPT and whatever it is, you have the answers to the world. You need to see what reality is, not an algorithm that spits out probabilistic correct answers as opposed to real world answers. So my advice is get any experience you can. It's that simple. Very early on, that involves dealing and working with other human beings that hopefully you care about and want to see them change, as much as human beings that you want to be part of their lives. I enjoy being on the streets of Cairo. I enjoy being on the streets of Kenya. I spent my holiday this year in Zambia, Uganda, Tanzania. I go to these places, yes, not just because they're beautiful countries, but also to see those worlds and understand what it is that's happening on the ground, and ask questions about how do you access a bank account, and find out people don't even know what that word means yet, and understand what it is it's going to take to get them to trust putting their money in a mobile wallet, for example. I mean, it's a crazy idea when someone has physical cash and you're telling them, go deposit it at this kiosk and it's going to be on your phone, and they have to trust that this system works. And what happens if my phone is stolen? I mean, you get some very simple questions that you need to solve. I'm mentioning all of this to say, get some real life world experience. That will become the foundation of whatever you do in the future.
Wow. Thank you so much. That's really good advice. And I'm sure the students that are listening to this will start leaving the house, start taking on those challenges and experiencing what they can